Hola, bona tarda i benvinguts i benvingudes al bookclub de la Carbonera. Comencem ara mateix, així que jo us deixo amb la Clara Roman, que és qui portarà el club de lectura, i això serà l'últim que sentireu dir en català. Així que benvinguts i benvingudes i endavant.
Hi, everyone. Well, another month and we're still here at home. I hope you're doing well, considering the circumstances. And yeah, so today we're going to talk about Sonny's Blues by James Baldwin. So but the first question, well, what I would like to do today is like introduce Baldwin a little bit so you know who he is and why he's important. Talk slightly about the historical context, so just a few notes, and then just start talking about the text and all that. So while you start, commenting or thinking about it, so I just wanted to know if you liked the poem, the story, how you felt while you were reading it, when you finished reading it at the beginning. Was there something that surprised you? Was there something that you particularly liked or that you just liked, or just in general how you felt while reading it? If you would recommend it to someone else, and if so, why? Just general comments about the story, and then we can go more in depth and talk about like more specific elements and themes and ideas and all that. So yeah, any comments you might have, I'm here, ready to hear them. Yeah, so while you think about that, I'll introduce Baldwin and then we can start talking about him. So Baldwin, I don't know if you did a little bit of research. I always like to do that when I read a text, not because I think the life of the author is super relevant to understand the text, but I think it's nice to know who they were a little bit. So James Baldwin was born in 1924 in Harlem, New York City. So that's kind of where this story is set. So he was familiar with this. And he wrote a lot of things. So he wrote like essays and poems and novels, plays as well. And he was also an activist. So he was really involved in the civil rights movement. And there's an essay by him that I really recommend. It's called Notes of a Native Son. It was published in 1955. And it deals with race and class and sexuality. He was a gay man. So for him, he was really interested in the intersection of race and sexuality, but also of class, of course. So that's what he talked about specifically in the West and more specifically in North America in the 20th century. He also lived in Paris because he was trying to escape racism and homophobia. I don't know if he was very successful, but it's true that the US has a very particular history of racism. And yeah, he was involved in the civil rights movement, which was this movement that at its height, it took place in the 1960s. And, you have figures of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. And it ended in the mid 60s when, with the Civil Rights Act, where more rights were granted to African Americans. And a couple more things I wanted to say is that I think he was really respected in the 60s, 70s, because he was really well spoken, he was really articulate. So he had this ability to transmit ideas and all of that. And I think that's super important because it made white people more open to listen to him, which I think is really sad, because I think you should be able to listen to anybody regardless of how well they speak or whatever. But he went on a lot of TV shows and he was interviewed a lot of time because he was so good at explaining all these things. And that's something you can relate to the story, is that he had seen a lot of his friends and relatives go through addiction, like drug addiction, go through imprisonment, even suicide. So that's something that happened often in these circles. And specifically in this story, this is 1958. I think it was written 1957. This is post-World War II in the US. So this is a time where there's starting to be a cultural revolution, a political revolution, a lot of social unrest that's going to lead to the civil rights movement. And I think, I don't know if you noticed, there's mention of housing projects. That's where these brothers lived. And that's something that Baldwin was also critical of. The government was building all these houses in an effort to protect people, but actually they weren't really well built. Also, people were kind of like forgotten there. There was a lot of poverty. The conditions were really, really bad. So he's also critical of that, I guess. So yeah, so that's kind of my introduction to Baldwin, to the historical context. And so yeah, I just wanted to know what you think of this story. I know there were two people here before, and now I don't know where you are, and I can't see you, so I'm just gonna wait.
I'm here.
Hello. Nice.
I wrote and I took a lot of notes because it's too long, this story. And I looked after some information about James Baldwin, about his life, and he went out and he lived in Paris and all of this. And the story, I like the story, and it's something. I think the older brother has a feeling of culpa. He feels guilty about to have left alone his young brother, and he don't know nothing about his brother when he realized that he's a good pianist player. He's very surprised, and I think it's in the context that you have said. They live in Harlem, and they in the story you can feel how the people lived in that way, in that days, in these areas that are some kinds of ghettos in the big city of New York.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that you talk about understanding, because that's one big theme that I see in this story. That's the difficulty of understanding, the inability to understand, but with time, it's like they live in different worlds. Even though they come from the same place, they end up living in two different dimensions in a way. So it's really hard for them to understand each other, which I find really interesting. And there's the language kind of supports that, because I don't know if you noticed, but to me, it was interesting that throughout the story, many times the narrator says, I don't know why, I don't know how, I don't, like, he explains things and then he says, I don't know why. So there's all that idea of knowledge and knowing things or not knowing and understanding more things. So I don't know if you picked up on that or what you think about that. But yeah, definitely. So more things. Tell me how, like, other people, did you like it? Hello.
Hello. I like it a lot. I have read all the story this week. I didn't have time before. So it was nice also, because normally I used to read the stories like in different moments, and I lose a little bit like the context I have to get into once again and everything. I like it. I have been in Harlem. I felt that it's quite realistic, no? The story quite typical of families there, very typical also the relationship between the brothers, and I don't know what to explain. It's quite similar to the things I used to read. So I really had good time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like the story myself. Like when it finished, I like said out loud, I said, wow, because the ending, I didn't really expect the ending, you know, like there's really a like transformation in the narrator where through music, he starts seeing a new way of
the whole life of him. Yeah.
So he's like, oh, okay, so this is my brother, this is his world, this is his kind of family in a way, the people who support him, who appreciate him, and he's actually really good. And you know, like there's also something I feel like I mean it's 20th century literature in general deals with communication a lot and the inability to communicate and not finding the words to say what you want to say. And I think that's something that in this story is really, really well shown. It's music's ability to communicate things, you know, like instead of having words, you can use other methods of communication, right? And in the story, Sonny is really good at communicating for music. And that's something that the narrator says at some point. He was like, you need to listen. Like, it's the importance of listening. If I stop to listen, and that's what he does in the end, right? But it's a long story, so it's difficult for me to go from page to page to show where he said so. Oh yeah. So on page 105, well, if you have the like booklet on page 105, in the paragraph that starts with, then they all gathered around Sonny and Sonny played. So there's a few things in this section that I found super nice, which is Sonny's fingers fill the air with life, his life. So, you know, like the whole time there's this conversation between death and life in the story, and this fear that Sonny will die or, you know, is killing himself and all that. And he's showing that actually he isn't. He's sharing his life through his music. And actually it says that life contains so many others. So the multiplicity of experiences within Sonny, but also touching so many people throughout his life. And then at the kind of like middle of the paragraph, he says, you know, how we could cease lamenting. So it's like, stop lamenting. Freedom was all around us. Yeah, it lurked around us. And I understood at last that he could help us to be free if we would listen, and that he would never be free until we did. So it's the importance of listening, of paying attention when someone is trying to communicate in a way that might not be traditional, right? So we're expecting him to just say things or do what he's expected to do, which is what the narrator wants all the time. Is like, just, you know, get a job, do this, do that. And it's like, no, he's living his life the way he sees it. So yeah, so that's the part that most resonated with me, like the power of music. As someone who loves music too and who plays, you know, an instrument and all that, to me it's like, wow. And the way that Baldwin used language was fascinating to me. So I don't know how you felt about that. And yeah, again, so I'm waiting to see that. Oh, hello.
Hi. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I was, when you were asking before, I was thinking about commenting about the end. Mm-hmm. I really felt like the last pages were kind of like a wrap up or a sum up where everything explained before made sense. And how, yeah, I thought about it, of him like being there in his brother's world and watching him play and everything. Kind of like a sublime moment, mm-hmm. Sublime, yeah. Where he through the music he ends up like seeing his brother, his father's brother who died, and his little daughter and everything together. So I really liked it, because I didn't know where the story like was gonna go to. I was like expecting, I don't know, maybe more death or something. I don't know. I wasn't sure, and then with this end, I got surprised, and I really liked it. The way he like makes all the story make sense. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really nice. I mean, something I think about often is when we talk about poverty and we haven't experienced it, like me personally, I'm privileged enough not to have experienced that, but I know my dad, he was like working class when he was young, and he's get really critical of people who portray poverty as this one thing where it's like, oh, it's so hard, and like everybody's like on drugs and beating each other up. It's like, that's not the reality. For some people it is, but sometimes it's like beautiful families that have that, survival element, that even if you ever fall into drugs or whatever, that doesn't mean it's the end of you. It's also important to see it as something human, like, and I think that's something Baldwin does, is humanize addiction and say, well, listen, this person is trying to live, not die. And I loved how the story said that. It's just another way of trying to overcome how hard life is in general for all of us, because we were sold, especially for African American communities in America, you're sold the American dream, and then for them it's even harder institutionally to get there, right? Even if you think of the Declaration of Independence, like this very famous American document, it always talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And for these people, it's like there's no life, there's no freedom. There's the pursuit of something, so they're trying to go after something, but will they ever get there? Not sure. So I think it's beautiful that this story gives us a more positive ending, because I was also terrified that we were going to go to like Sonny's gonna die, or it's not gonna end well, or I don't know what's gonna happen. But no, it's like, well, maybe he's gonna die, we don't know, but at least we are left with a kind of positive note of there's some understanding, there's communication, there's union, there's all these things happening. So it's super beautiful there, no?
Yep.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Hi.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good.
Well, I think I must say this is the best story I've read in this book club, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Although I have to read it very quickly and online because I cannot find a book. But I really liked it very much. I think it was wonderful. And I mean, not only the way that the story is written, because I think the style is really wonderful. I loved it. I couldn't stop reading it. It's like it engages you in a very strong way, I think. And on the other hand, also, I like very much because it speaks, I think, mainly about feelings. The feelings of the characters, which sometimes is not that easy to find, especially in male literature. I could tell. Okay, if you read sometimes about women literature, maybe it's easiest, but when you read about men, they speak about other things, about things that happen, and he was speaking mainly, I think, about the feelings that he had, the brother, or the mother fell when the other. I mean, I think this was wonderful. I loved very much.
Yeah, I'm happy you liked it. I really liked it too. Like, I was a little bit scared because it was a longer one, so I thought, I don't know if you're gonna, because we've been reading such short stories that this is kind of in between. But I think it reads really easily. Like, it's just because it's kind of more of a conversation that you're having, so it doesn't feel heavy, or it's heavy more in that the topics that it covers are difficult and tough. But I think it's it's so. Like, the rhetoric is so beautiful, it's so poetical, the way he writes, that it's kind of like flowing, right? So it's very nice to see and understand. And the way he uses metaphors and like figures, and like, when he talks about ice and light and dark and all these themes, like, I think it's so like beautiful as well. Yeah.
Wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, so So yeah, let me comment a couple of like themes that I see like briefly, so that not briefly as in explaining them, but just saying, I found these, and these, and then maybe you can talk to me about your different themes. For example, for me, there's brotherhood, but I relate it to family as well, because there's a 7-year difference between the two characters, like Sonny and the brother, the narrator. So there's that idea of protection, I feel like, but there's also something that I noticed, which was the idea of projection, as in the father and the older brother projecting their wishes onto the younger one, saying, this is what we want your life to be. We don't care what you want your life to be. We want your life to be like, you know, modeled after something specific that maybe you don't like. But I think that's very much related to protection, considering their situation. There's also communication, as we've talked about, but there's so much more to say about this. Also, the idea of feeling trapped and imprisoned. Of course, light versus dark. So I don't know if you saw passages where that featured, or if you noticed that at all. And then, of course, the power of music and the title itself, Sonny's Blues. So, like, have you heard the word blues before? Not just about music, but, you know, the expression, I've got the blues, what it means. So what do you think the title has several meanings, or what do you make of that? Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Then, yeah, I like the story, and for me, at first, I didn't pay attention to the date at first, and I thought that the story was more modern, more in the 70s or 80s. Afterwards, I realized it was, but it strikes me that these problems were the same in these years, in the 50s. I thought it was something more from the 60s and 70s. And yeah, one thing that struck me too was the thing that the army, the role that the army plays on them. Then it's like the only way to go out from Harlem or this kind of background is going to the army, and is like their future and their perspectives in life they are really short.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that when Sonny says that he wants to be a musician,
yeah,
his brother says, okay, you cannot be a musician. That's not a job. How are you going to survive with this? And yeah, this story, I think it talks about determination. I don't know how to say that. How where you rise up, you have one possibilities in your life or not, and the way they try to break these determinations.
Yeah.
And the story of being a musician, that is not easy. It was not easy in the 50s. It's not easy nowadays.
Yeah.
I thought it has many things in common, from many things that we can feel nowadays here.
Yeah, it's a very modern story, I feel like, as well. But the thing you said about the army, I think is super interesting, because it happens nowadays as well, that mostly for poor people, including African Americans, a great option is to go to the army, because they give you free education, and they give you a lot of different like things that make your life easier. So that's why it's actually there's a lot of controversy around it, especially from African American communities, because they feel like it's a way to force African Americans to join the army, and it's a way for the army to be constantly filled with people because they allow people to have free education, free healthcare, and they offer a lot of things like that. So for these people as well, like even then, being able to go to the army was sometimes the only choice to get out of that neighborhood where there weren't a lot of opportunities. And the story as well, they mentioned the GI Bill at some point. I don't remember where, but that's something that Sonny says, like, yeah, but when I'm done with the army, then I get the GI Bill, which is, it's like help for veterans. So people who have, been in the army or who have been in a war, then they get some financial help or other type of help from the government. So that's ways that, the American government continues to support the military and all that, and that military system. And then with like growing up as well and the way they were raised, as you mentioned, there's the idea of determinism, like you cannot get away from what you're, there's the idea that for these children, even at the beginning, there's mention that like, we know that that's what their life is going to be, like always. I think it's like on page 58, like the second page, like the second paragraph. I was sure the first time Sonny had ever had horse, he couldn't have been much older than these boys were now. These boys now were living as we'd been living then. They were growing up with a rush and their heads bumped abruptly against the low ceiling of their actual possibilities. So it's like, it's showing that like they know that they're not going to get far in life, not just because of who they are, but also because the society they live in that doesn't allow them to get really far in life, which is a reality that I think still happens nowadays. And that's why this is such a modern story that, I'm pretty sure, especially in America, it's more like relevant, right? And for an African American, like we're just white people talking about this. So I guess there's that, we don't really know what it's like, but this, like, it kind of makes you see that reality. Like they know that they can't get far in life just because of their condition. Like we're, like poor, we are African Americans, like all these things get together to, it's like one barrier after another, or like I would always think of like a running track, and like the white person who is also like richer and has better, opportunities in life, it's just like running smoothly around, whereas the black person, has to like maybe jump, hurdle, or maybe there's some water in them and then they trip and they fall. So there's all these things, making your progress much slower, and this story shows that really well. So also, like, I don't know if you have, what do you think about the way drug use is portrayed as well? I think that's really, really interesting from the different points of view, right? Like from people who have been on drugs in this story, people like the narrator who doesn't really know what it feels like and all of that. So anything you think about that? And the way Harlem is portrayed as well. If you go to page 69, I think that's so not interesting to see that darkness, that like feeling of being imprisoned and all of that. So I'll wait to see if you want to say something.
It's me. Just a thing that I wanted to say is that as I was reading the story, I felt that, it has to do a little bit with what you're explaining, that more than a story about life or death or the background of this kind of life, I felt that from the beginning, Sonny, he's trying to explain to his brother that he's not able to listen, more than his music, he's not the kind of person who is able to listen to the other ones, So I think that the whole story has more to see with like two different kind of people, the ones who are living, listening, and the ones who are living, trying to telling the other people how to do things, no?
Mm.
And finally, the end of the story, it was really nice because it seems to be possible to learn, no? To listen to the other people and moreover their music or whatever is important for him. But I think like no, in this kind of neighborhoods, it was important this in what you read before, the last sentence, which explains that they were filled with rage, no? There are people who lived with a lot of rage. That's why they start with a horse or something. But more than the drugs or the life or decide to live or not is the capacity, no, to listen or not.
Yeah, definitely. Like it's interesting because I think from both of them there's love. Like the narrator loves his brother and is trying to do what's best for him, but he doesn't want to listen, as you're saying. So it's like, no, I don't care that you want to be a musician. I just want you to get that job that's gonna give you money and let you have a good future away from this neighborhood. So he's essentially he's doing the same thing that society is doing for them. Like, you have to be like this. You cannot be your own people, right?
Yeah. And also that it would be interesting to see if the narrator would be this way, if he wouldn't have listened the story that his mother explained him about his father and the brother of his father. No, I think in that point everything changed. No, so he felt with the responsibility to get through with everything and help his brother and try not to. I don't know if from the beginning the relationship was that way or the relationship starts to change from the moment that his mother explained him the story of his father.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a change there. I think it's not a full change, like 100%, because I think you can never change a person just by saying something, but I think there's something that clicks there where it's like, oh, so it's the idea that there's so much more going on under the surface that we see, and I think he says this at some point, I don't remember where, but he talks about you know, we always talk to people like, oh, everybody's on drugs and look at how it's killing everybody. But then you think, yeah, but that's only the people who actually die. There's a lot of people who do drugs who function normally in a way, you know. But we don't know they're on drugs because they function the way other people who are not on drugs do. So in fact, and I'm not saying this is not like, oh, drugs are amazing. It's like we demonize people who use drugs because it's like, oh, they're so weak, they couldn't, you know, they're killing themselves. And then it's like, no, they want to live. And so I think hearing the story of the mother and the dad, it's like, you know, he never told you that so that you didn't see how hard his life was, his tears, because he never wanted you to see him suffering. And I think Sonny, in that sense, is more open, like, hey, I'm suffering and I'm showing you that I'm suffering. So just listen to me to understand why I'm suffering. Because it's the thing, is like everybody's trying to change Sonny. Nobody's trying to understand why he's doing drugs or why he's trying to escape, all these things. Nobody's saying, but why? What's happening to you? And that's where he's trying to explain, but he doesn't know how to explain it properly, right? He's like, I don't know why. And that's why he shows through music, like, do you want to come with me tonight and see that? I think that's also very brave, like, come see me be a musician. Also the way music is described at the beginning, like, I don't know if you notice that when Sonny starts living with Isabel and the parents of Isabel, and he's always hammering on the piano, and the way it's described makes it seem like it's super annoying and like that nobody appreciates it and nobody likes it because he's in another world. So there's even that sense of not appreciating Sonny. Like, to me, at least at the beginning, I was like, oh my God, he's so annoying. But then as the story continues, when you go to Sonny's world and you place him in an environment that actually supports him and appreciates him where he can be himself, it's like, oh, actually he's brilliant. He's like a great musician. People really appreciate him. And when you read what the narrator is saying, it's like he can see everything, and it's what you were saying before, like that he sees his father and he sees his mother and he sees, his family and everything, because now he's in his universe and he's starting to open up, right? So I think there's definitely that element of I think it's the idea of vulnerability, right? When the mother shows that idea of vulnerability, and when the it's like the mother opening up and she's crying, but she's talking about the dad who suffered through that and the dad who also cried. So it's like being super vulnerable and showing that moment of intimacy that kind of like opens something in the narrator, who's just approaching his relationship to his brother from a point of protection, but it ends up hurting the brother, And it reminded me of a parent-child relationship where you want what's best for your children, but maybe that's not what they want or what's actually best for them, really. So it's about that idea. That's why I talked about projection before. I talked about light and dark and all these things. I think the page that said 69, but also 72 is also super interesting, because he talks about when he last saw his mother alive. Like, you remember that moment. It's interesting how this story is written, because it's like from the present and you go back to like moments of like flashes of the past, and then you go back to the present. And when he talks about the children and the adults in that home on Sunday, and like the light and dark, like especially darkness. There's so much reference to darkness. What I don't know if you notice that presence of darkness all the time, or what you make of it. And even on page 73, at the beginning, it says, "And when light fills the room, the child is filled with darkness." He knows that every time this happens, he's moved just a little closer to that darkness outside. So it's like, and we're talking, I think it's important to understand and contextualize that this is an African American family, an African American community. So there's that element of the difficulty they have in life. And that's why from the very beginning, from the moment they are born, if you remember the story of Sweetness, it's that terror in the mother that her child is so dark-skinned. And I think you can see that here as well. And one more thing I wanted to say, I wanted to see what you think, is on that same page 73, the darkness outside is what the old folks have been talking about. It's what they've come from. It's what they endure. And I find it so interesting, the idea of endurance, that instead of living, you are enduring. The idea of constantly having to fight and struggle and living your life in these conditions is always going to be about how much you can endure, how much you can accept, and all of that. So yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts about this or anything else that you want to comment.
Hi.
Hi
again. Regarding what you were saying about darkness and light, I had realized, the use of the word dark and darkness, and also related to the color of the skin as well, and the different tones as well. That is something that I saw last month with Sweetness. And, and so I think, and also when I was like picturing everything, and towards the last scene as well, like when they are there and they're gonna play, everything seems like very, very dark. And he talks, there's an image that I really liked, when he talks about this guy that shows up in the end, Creole. And he says that his smile, his teeth are very, very bright, and it's like he's like dark, like cold dark, I think he says, and then he makes the contrast with the teeth, you know, and it's like the light that appears there, and I really like this image as well. Yeah, that's regarding the darkness and the light. And also before you were commenting about the suffering, like throughout the whole story, and I think that it's something that it's like he relates all the time. And at the end there's a woman singing, I think, and he says like she must have suffered a lot to sing like that, right? So I think that it's something that it's like showed all throughout the story, that it's also like a link to the whole story, like the suffering and what you're saying about like them like struggling with life and everything that they have lived, and how he connects it with the music and a way to express it again through this suffering. I found it really interesting.
Yeah, I think that has to do with like the role of the artist, right? Like, and not as in like artists always suffer, but it's the idea that like now at university we were talking about Walt Whitman, and Walt Whitman, he was this poet who really saw the role of the poet as a guide, as someone who can see beyond what normal people can see. And this here, I see that as the artist transcending what normal people can see, and he's suffering because he can see and perceive so much in a way that others don't. And it's also why like the people who have played the music, and you know, this little smile of like recognition, like we are the same because we're suffering in the same way. Yeah.
And they find this way to put it out as well, because that's
to communicate, exactly. And even you see in the scene that you mentioned of like the people playing music outside in the street, there was a woman who was like battered, like her face had been beaten up, I think, or something. So there was this person of violence, and she's always there, also there appreciating that. So it's like another person who has suffered really, and who is appreciating this music because she knows what it feels, right? Yeah, 100%. And also what you said about light at the very end, when they're playing music. I don't know if you, on page 101, if you have this booklet at first it said I was in Sonny's world, but also at the end, they were really careful not to step into that circle of light too suddenly. That if they moved into the light too suddenly without thinking, they would perish in a flame. I think that was fascinating, also because I think we tend to see light as something that's always positive, but light can also hurt you. Like you can be blinded by the sun and things like that. So it's like if you spend your life in the dark and you want to go to the light, you have to do it very slowly. So that's kind of what's happening here, right? Where they're moving very slowly into the light, and progressively they end up in that light because they have achieved that, you know, moment of freedom and peace. Kind of what I feel like you know, the whole it's what they're explaining about music.
Then Clara, I think this light is also a metaphor of life, because he's been in a really dark life situation where he's been in prison, and now he's coming into light, into the normal life, playing with band, but he must be careful, because if he there's the danger to repeat the same mistakes and to get back to the previous situation. And I wanted to add also this, for me, these stories about transformation. I think some of you say that at first, Sonny, you think it's a poor boy, useless, without yeah, nothing remarkable. And yeah, at the end, we realize that he has something really beautiful and brilliant. He's brilliant in one skill. And yeah, I think it's about this stories about this, the transformation, this kind of transformation to useless to skillful. And yeah, and the thing that we say, the determinism, that things can change. Not you do not have to follow the path that they wrote for you. You can change somehow. And yeah, it's very, I don't know, not helpful, hopeful story, that it gives you hope that could be different.
Well, I think it's the idea also to consider that you have to reevaluate what you see as being useful and useless, right? In this story, it's like, no, you need to do something that's useful so that you can make money, because that's what life is about, right? Like making a living. And that's why I think there's also this confrontation between the narrator and his brother, like between Sonny and the narrator, when he's like, you have to do, you have to find a job that's going to give you money. And it's like, no, but I want to do what I want to do, like what makes me happy. And it's like, well, yeah, like I don't remember where it was again, but it was like, isn't life about doing what you would like to do? And the brother is like, the narrator is like, well, yeah, but it's, it's mostly about making money and making a living. And I think at the end he understands, like, in a way, this gives Sonny the opportunity to make money because he's really good at it. But at the same time, it's like, well, maybe it's more than that, right? And it's what he says also on page 102 in the second paragraph, where he says that all I know about music is that not many people ever really hear it. Like it's there, but we don't really pay attention. Sometimes we don't even notice that there's music playing. And I think it's the same with people and communication, that sometimes people are trying to say something, but unless they are literally saying, hey, I need your help, we don't really see that as, happening. So it's about learning how to communicate in more ways than just one. So like, okay, that Sonny is doing drugs. So instead of demonizing him for doing that, try to understand him and try to listen to him and think, hey, why is this happening? And why are so many people in our community, falling into drugs? Well, then, maybe we need to, talk to each other. Obviously, it's more complicated than that, and there's like a lot more reasons. But I think it's like, you can see this on like page 103, right, where it's like Sonny moved deep within, exactly like someone in torment, and there's also like music at the very beginning of 103. He was having a dialogue with Sonny, this is Creole, and he wanted Sonny to leave the shoreline and strike out for the deep water. He was Sonny's witness that deep water and drowning were not the same thing. And I think that was so beautiful. Like, just because you go out into the sea, which is unpredictable and uncertain, does not mean that you're gonna drown. Going out into the world, you might be able to succeed in a way that's not prototypical, but that's good for you. And I think that was really beautiful. And it talks about this at the end of the page as well, no? By the fire and fury of the battle which was occurring in him up there. So like the narrator is starting to see that that it's important to listen, right? Like on page 105 as well, like and this tale, according to that face, that body, those strong hands on those strings, has another aspect in every country and a new depth in every generation. Listen, now these are Sonny's blues. So again, he's like talking about, in every country, people are going to communicate in different ways, and we're going to say things in different ways. So we have to learn how to listen. Yeah. I find it so beautiful. And on page 104, I was like, I put a star in there, like, this is so important at the very end. It says, For while the tale of how we suffer and how we are delighted and how we may triumph is never new, it always must be heard. There isn't any other tale to tell. It's the only light we've got in all this darkness. So it's like, we will always suffer, you know, like from the beginning of time until the end of time, everybody's going to suffer because that's part of life. And it's worth telling, and it's important to talk about it and to communicate. And I think that's what he's saying here. And again, it comes back to the idea of vulnerability and being open and saying things however you can, even if you can't say it with traditional language, but try to find other ways. But also, as you, like some of you have pointed out, it's not just about saying, but also listening and being capable of listening. So yeah, which brings us back to the title, Sonny's Blues, right? It's not only his song, but also the feeling of sadness. Yep.
Nothing more.
That's it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello again. Well, yeah, I think it's very interesting the point you remarked, Clara, and the other girl, which I don't remember the name, is a healing power of music. No, I think that's a very important topic in the story, and it makes me think about, for example, I don't know if you know this about Brazil. I think the name was Carlinhos Brown.
Oh yeah.
Do you know this musician, for example? And I remember that he talked about the band or something that he created in a poor area of Salvador or the Bahia. Well, I don't remember now, but I think it was a very interesting story also, no? This healing power of music and how people can survive their problems through music, yeah? And, well, I also work in a very poor neighborhood in El Prat, no, in San Cosme, and I think that that's a very important thing. Not only music, but also other things that you can take out from students. I mean, the strength of those students, not the weaknesses, but the strength. You know, sometimes we only think of the academical points, no, like the mother or the brother was saying to Sonny, oh, but music is not an important thing, you should study another thing. But if it's what they really like, I think we should help them to do this activity, because at the end, it's what it makes them happy, you know. So I think we should help them in this way. I don't know.
That's something I'm working on. I have 17 or something, and something we're working on is trying to create like an actual dossier, like really like a project where we're working on like the perfect school, which it's kind of cliche, but we are reading a lot of articles and we're watching videos about it, and we're doing like this year-long project. And something we were talking about, and they did a survey with their schoolmates and everything, and they were saying like how school like destroys creativity, right? It's all about finding a job. So it's like economics, math, science, which is like, if you like maths, that's amazing, and you should work on that. But if you are not really into it and you love art, why isn't that also supported and valued? Because this is a story that was written in the 50s, and you might have, I mean, I know for a fact my parents had the same conversation with my brother when he was younger, like, you're not going to go into anything artistic. You have to do something like accounting, which is like, but that's boring. Why can't we encourage people to at least try? And if it doesn't work out, well then, you know, just try something else. And here there's that element of hope where the narrator sees that it is working out, because Sonny is really living. Like someone who's, the narrator is like, you're killing yourself, but then he sees here, well, actually that's not true. He's really living, but because life is so hard, or for whatever reason, because we don't really know why, we get an idea of why he might be doing drugs and what's hard for him, but at the end of the day, we don't really know, right? I think the idea, like, he was always looking for something a little bit better, or things like that, but what is that, right? So it's just, I think it also has to do with this very American thing, like pursuit of happiness, which is, I think, universal right now. It's like we're always trying to find something better, always better, because we're never content with what we have. And I think it's very human, and I understand. But at the same time, we live, we're kind of obsessed with stereotypes and all of that, so that we don't really see what we have around us, which, again, it's something very cliche that people say a lot nowadays. But I think it's true. Like, we're never content. Like, oh, when I lose 1 kilo, or when I do this, or when I do that, it's like, yeah, but in the meantime, maybe you can try to be happy, or to experience life in all its shades, yeah, with the happiness and anger and sadness and confusion and all of that. So I think that's what the way Baldwin describes music is so poetical, and it's so like all encompassing. Like, it shows all the different layers of music and how it communicates so many things, and how it's like there's anger and delight and sorrow and freedom and all these things. And I also noticed on page 105 something that is also super traditional in literature is, he said at the very bottom of the page, he was giving it back, as everything must be given back, so that passing through death, it can live forever. So that through music, he's given back his art and everything. And it's the idea, like Shakespeare wrote about it, Walt Whitman, that I mentioned before, wrote about it. The idea that through art, we can become immortal, because we're creating something that other people are going to, receive and make part of their own lives. So when you read a book, it stays with you. Well, not all of them, but some of them stay with you. With art, it's the same. And here, that's kind of what the narrator is saying, is like, it's going to live forever. Even though you're going to die one day, your art is going to stay here. And I mean, in a way, it's true, because we're reading this story about Sonny, even though he's probably fictional, but we are appreciating his art in a way, right? And I think that's why the whole story is named like this, Sonny's Blues, because it's like his music, his song, he's, this like kind of, well, the blues is like traditionally what precedes rhythm and blues and rock and roll and all of that. It's a very African-American kind of music that's very sad and melancholic, and that's what it talks about. Well, that's what it conveys. And that's what the story conveys as well. But with that element of hope, it's not necessarily just sadness. There's a lot of layers of feeling. So yeah, we have a few more minutes. So I don't know if anybody wants to comment, like say some closing thoughts, something we haven't talked about. You're like, oh no. Cut. I mean, there's so much more that we can say, right? But I think we'll try to cover, these big ideas of healing power of music and salvation and light versus dark and all that.
The last idea that you have said, that there is something hopeless, there's hope in the darkness.
Yeah, Hope in the Dark. Yeah,
Hope in the Dark.
The Way is a collection of essays by Rebecca Solnick that I really recommend. Because it's kind of a series of essays by this woman who talks about hope, having hope during difficult times, and she talks about politics in the US, but it's very nice. One last thing also, I don't know if you noticed, but he's drinking at the very end, Sonny's drinking a glass of scotch and milk, which I think is very significant, because it's like a very adult drink, but at the same time a very childish drink. So it's that like milk, like a child would drink, but also like, hard, like alcohol. I think that's very beautiful, like that you can see Sonny being back to his childhood, where he was this, bright young boy, but also the hardship of life as he's an adult. And I don't know much about religion, but from what I've read, the very last sentence when it talks about the cup of trembling is a reference to the Bible. But I don't know much about what it could be. but yeah, he was very influenced by the Bible. I forgot to say that Baldwin was a preacher. So I don't know if you know, like a religious preacher when he was very young. So that also helped him become better at speaking and articulating thoughts. But he was very influenced by the writings of the Bible. But then he was also very critical of it because of stance on race and sexuality and all that. So yeah, I don't know if you have any finishing comments.
Which was the title of the other story of Baldwin that you said in the beginning? Notes of?
A Native Son. Native, like nothing. Yeah, Native Son. It's a essay. It's a collection of essays, so it's not a novel.
Okay.
There's a very famous novel called Giovanni's Room that talks about sexuality and race. That's not very long, but like very, very nice. So yeah.
Thanks.
Anything else, or we're good to go? For next month, it's gonna be one story only, much shorter. And it's the one by Jumpalahi.
Yeah.
The real Derwin.
We have it in our book.
Yeah, it's here. Like it's on page 107, so just after Baldwin's one.
Nice. I love this author. Yes.
This is like 1999, so we're jumping ahead like 50 years. So we're gonna see how that fares, and we're going back to like kind of like Indian culture and all that. So
nice. Thank you
so much for participating.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Each other next month.
See you. Yeah.
Okay.
Enjoying the lockdown.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. See you.